All right. So this slide shows the citric acid cycle in a way we haven't looked at yet, and it's showing you specifically the enzymes involved with each reaction. So we've learned the citric acid cycle starts with pyruvic acid or pyruvate, however, whatever you want to call it, and then it's carried through a series of reactions. In this example, it gives you not only the enzyme picture, but it tells you the name of each enzyme. So every enzyme is involved in a specific reaction. Literally, this enzyme only exists to cause this molecule to react and become this one. That's its only role. Each one is unique. Your first task is to describe how many enzymes are involved in this cycle, so you count them up. Next is, what is the role of an enzyme in this process? We've talked about enzymes in chapter 6, which would have been your old notebook. You're welcome to go on the internet and just Google enzyme, but we really are trying to reflect on what it is. If you remember what enzymes do, just give a description. It's just a reflection question, a review question. The third one is, explain why each enzyme would have the same form or a different form. Now, each one of these, I said, is unique. Why? Unique means differences. Why might they have different forms? So that's a question to consider. What I want to do is show you one past slide to help you think this through a little. So we have a past slide that shows an enzyme. This slide right here. This is an enzyme. All enzymes are proteins, and they all do a particular thing. You can see this enzyme took these atoms or molecules. This is an atom, and this is a molecule, and it changed them. A reaction occurred, right? Well, if you look at the enzyme, you can see the shape is perfect for this to fit here and these to fit there. And that shape of the enzyme is perfect or unique for this reaction. Use that idea, build off that idea in your thinking. On question 3. So why is each enzyme unique? Well, think about what it's reacting with. Look at it. Figure it out. Try to relate this idea to form and structure of each enzyme. Why is each enzyme unique? Why does each have a different form or structure? See what you can come up with. This right here, this link is going to, of course, help you with either the citric acid cycle or understanding how enzymes work. This slide right here is, as always, you can either get a printed copy of this from me, or you can print this off yourself, or you can fill it out in your notes section and just copy the sections down. So, as always, these start with a scientific problem. This question you need to read, and you generate a hypothesis here. So when you read this question, what do you think is the answer? You say, my hypothesis is right here. After that, you use both of these links here, this one or this one, to get to build observations. So both of those links will take you to a place where you can get some observations, 1 through 9. And then at the end, once you look at your observations, compare it with your hypothesis, and decide, well, is my hypothesis getting supported with anything that I learned with these observations? You can also say, is my hypothesis or the observations providing any information or knowledge about this original scientific problem? And you just discuss in writing here. You could also draw models to demonstrate what you've learned and how it might be able to answer the question, the scientific problem, or how it could potentially explain your hypothesis down here. So you could write at least 4 sentences, or you can draw a model. All right. If you need advice on drawing a model, I have resources. You can just ask me and I'll provide them. One of the videos you'll watch to try to help you fill it out is this process right here. So one of the primary ways so far students have gotten observations is by following this whole graphic here and all the processes happening. All right, this slide is our scientific problems or purpose of learning about Chapter 9. All these complex chemical reactions, all these complex chemistry things, that it all has to do with us learning more about how we can stay healthy and manage our weight and look fit. It's all about learning how our bodies make and use energy. And it's all about how nutrition and what we eat can support us in all our activities, especially if you're a student athlete or just have a sport or hobby you engage in. So remember, every time we're learning about these things and you're wondering why do we need to learn about these weird molecules or enzymes, this is why, all these problems. These are things that we need to know in life to get along and to feel good about ourselves and to manage our health. All right, this slide number 51, one of our last slides. This explains what electron transport chain is. It's our first definition for electron transport chain, and it is the third and final step in making ATP. It makes, again, this process is responsible for making, as this little picture shows, making 90% of all the ATP in your body. You have questions? You can, this question right here about NADH, it's really asking what role does NADH have in the electron transport chain? And to answer that, you need to go back to an earlier slide right here. Electron carrier is NADH. And what does NADH do? It says NAD plus steals electrons and hydrogens. So NAD plus does that, and you can see it right here. It's in blue. NAD plus steals hydrogens and electrons from these molecules during the citric acid cycle. The question is, why does it do that? Well, if you look at the electron transport chain, you have to ask yourself, do I see hydrogens in this picture? Do I see electrons in this picture? When you were doing the statement of understanding task here, when you're looking and watching the simulation, the graphics, do you see electrons involved? Do you see hydrogens involved? Discuss that. So question 1 is basically asking you, how did NAD plus or NADH have any kind of involvement in the process of electron transport chain? All right, the second one is identify how many proteins in the membrane are binding or passing on electrons. So if you look at the picture, yes, the picture is small, you can zoom in on it. We can do that right now. Let's just zoom. And you can see here's some electrons. So the red paths tell you. And so these different shapes, just like in this picture, this shape is showing you a protein. These are membrane proteins, and some of them may be transporting, maybe not, but they're proteins embedded in the membrane of the mitochondria. And you have to identify how many of these proteins here are passing on electrons. Next slide. Just like we studied, here, let me back the zoom up. All right, just like we learned about Kobe Bryant, how many calories he burns, we have Laila Ali, the daughter of Muhammad Ali, and it talks about how many calories she burns in a typical boxing match that lasts 8 minutes. It also tells you how much energy, not only that she burns, but how much food she would need to eat. It gives an example of what she could eat to equal how many calories she burns during that process. So as she eats, she takes in calories. Those calories are in the form of either proteins, lipids, or carbohydrates, and then she's taking that food, digesting it, and making ATP, right? Well, how many calories does she burn? That's one of the questions. What food would that amount of calories equal? This little paragraph tells you that also. You have to decide once again, is that a lot of food? Give 2 reasons why you think it is or not. Do you think you would? Now, she weighs 166 pounds. Do you think someone who weighs more or less burns the same number of calories? So I want you to generate a hypothesis on what you think of that. And generally speaking, people who are taller or heavier tend to have more cells in their body. So that number of cells, what do you think number of cells has to do with how much a bigger or smaller person might use calories? Do you think someone would use more or less than this person? Does everyone use the same number of calories? Provide a hypothesis. And then finally, you just summarize the article. All right, the next slide, almost the last slide, it's another slide explaining electron transport chain. And you need to create this table in your notebook. This table right here talks about some of these transport proteins. Now, our goal is to identify in this table. So complex 1 is this protein. They're calling this protein complex 2, 3, and 4, right? So what goes into complex 1? So you have to study. So I'll help you with complex 1, and then your responsibility will be doing 2, 3, and 4. So in complex 1, an electron is passed from NADH to complex 1. So at least one thing that's going in is an electron, and it gets passed on, but it goes through it. Another thing that's going in is this hydrogen atom here. The hydrogen atom is passed forward into this inner space membrane where there's it's a building up concentration of hydrogens. Does anything come out? Well, you could argue that the when the NADH makes contact with complex 1, it then not only has things go into the complex 1, but it also comes out as something new. It comes out as NAD+, because when NAD+ loses a, or when NADH loses a hydrogen, it becomes NAD+. All right, do the same, and so for coming out, you could say NAD+. You could also say the hydrogen comes out, so, or the electron. You could say they go in and they go out for complex 1. Now, continue the same thing for complex 2, 3, and 4, and you've completed slide number 53. Slide 54. Because electron transport chain has so many steps and processes, complex, we spend more time, so we have a few slides, right? All right, this slide gives another definition of the electron transport chain and explains an important part of it, which is called ATP synthase. ATP synthase is this guy right here, represented or modeled in a different way right here. But like ATP synthase is very interesting. It has parts that spin. It has an area where hydrogens move through it. Again, why do hydrogens move through? Well, if you have a high concentration up here and a low concentration here, and if there's a tunnel where hydrogens can move, they'll naturally want to diffuse from high to low concentration. Which brings us to this question. It says, use the definition above to summarize why the energy of the electron is needed to keep pumping hydrogen atoms into the inner membrane of the mitochondria. So you have all these proteins pumping hydrogen atoms up to the top area here, building up a high concentration. Why? Why is that exactly, right? So the idea is why, summarize in your own words why the proteins are pumping so many hydrogens to one side. Why are they building up such a high concentration on the top side rather than the low side? That's why, so you're going to summarize what's going on there. Summarize what the proteins are doing, which is essentially building up the concentration, right? And then number 2, it says apply concepts. Why do hydrogen atoms flow through the ATP synthase during ATP production? So hydrogen atoms, just like this bluish arrow shows, hydrogen atoms are flowing from this top section down. Why does this happen? Use the concept of diffusion to explain. There are 3 videos here, all supporting this process, all helping you understand. I recommend using them just to support your understanding and your processing of this. And so you better understand how ATP synthase works. But diffusion is certainly involved. ATP synthase, this little molecular protein machine here, this ATP making protein, it can't function without diffusion. So this whole slide is about thinking about that. Our last slide here is, why is oxygen needed in the body? All you're going to do is study this picture and figure out, what is oxygen doing in this? Because up to this point, all earlier 54 slides never explain why we even breathe oxygen. Not once. So we had studied what happens to glucose, why we need it. We knew how carbon dioxide is formed. It's formed during citric acid cycle. We know during glycolysis, water is produced. And we know from all these different processes, energy, or ATP, is made. But up until this slide, this final slide, we had no idea why we're even breathing oxygen. But we know we breathe more oxygen when we exercise. We know we breathe oxygen. We're alive. We use energy. We need it. But right here, this whole picture will explain to you. If you study it in detail, you'll find out, what is oxygen doing? What is its role? What is it reacting with? Then explain.